She
Happy
spent
midnight,
all day
Marcus.
cooking his
The
favorite
whole
meal,
world is watching
set
your
the table with
downfall
their
live.
finest china, wrapped a
Eleanor,
vintage
what have you
Rolex
done?
she had searched months to find, and he never came home. While she waited alone, 8 months pregnant, her husband was 40 miles away at a penthouse party, his arm wrapped around another woman, wearing the necklace he told his wife he had lost. But that is not even the worst part. What she discovered that night would shatter everything she believed about her 12-year marriage. The affair was just the beginning. Behind closed doors, her husband had been building something far more sinister.
Got him.
A trap. A web of
Christmas
lies designed to
gala,
paint
how
her as
embarrassing.
unstable, dangerous, mentally unfit. His plan? Take her baby, destroy her reputation. Leave her with nothing. He thought he had won. He thought she was broken. He forgot one thing. Before she became his wife, she was an investigative journalist who brought down corrupt CEOs and politicians for a living. And now he just became her final target. What happens over the next 12 months is a masterclass in patience, strategy, and revenge served ice cold at midnight on Christmas Eve. Stay with me until the very end, because the moment she delivers her midnight gift, your jaw will hit the floor. This is the midnight gift, and it starts right now. Eleanor Reeves stood at the dining room window of their Greenwich home, watching snow fall softly onto the manicured lawn. The flakes drifted down in lazy spirals, catching the light from the Christmas decorations that lined the eaves of every house on their street. It was the kind of scene that belonged on a holiday card, picture perfect in every way. 8 months pregnant, Eleanor pressed one hand against her belly where the baby kicked with steady insistence. The little one had been active all day, as if she sensed her mother's growing unease. Eleanor had read somewhere that babies in the womb could feel their mother's emotions, could hear their heartbeats and respond to their stress. She hoped that was not true. She hoped her daughter could not feel the worry that had been building in her chest for months now. The dining table behind her was set with the good china, the Lenox pattern with the delicate gold rim that she only used for special occasions. 2 place settings faced each other across an expanse of white linen. Candles burned low in their silver holders, the flames flickering occasionally when the heating system cycled on. A small gift wrapped in deep velvet fabric sat beside the empty chair where her husband should have been sitting 2 hours ago. She had spent all afternoon preparing this dinner. Beef Wellington, his favorite, with roasted vegetables and a chocolate souffle for dessert. She had wanted everything to be perfect for their last Christmas before the baby came, their last holiday as just the two of them. Next year, there would be a high chair at this table, a little person demanding attention, changing everything. Eleanor checked her phone again. No messages, no missed calls, nothing but the cheerful glow of the home screen showing a photo from their 10th anniversary trip to Paris. In the picture, Marcus had his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower like people who believed their happiness would last forever. She remembered that trip so clearly. They had walked along the Seine at sunset, holding hands like newlyweds. Marcus had surprised her with dinner at a restaurant she had been dreaming about for years. He had ordered champagne and told her she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. That was 2 years ago. Sometimes it felt like 2 lifetimes. "Daddy's running late, sweetheart," she whispered to her belly. "He promised he'd be here by 6. The baby kicked again, as if in response. Eleanor smiled despite herself. Whatever else was happening in her life, this child was a miracle. This child was hope. She walked back to the table and adjusted the napkins that did not need adjusting. She straightened the silverware that was already perfectly aligned. She moved the velvet-wrapped gift an inch to the left, then an inch to the right, then back to where it had been. She did these things because doing them was easier than admitting what she had been feeling for months now. The late nights that multiplied like rabbits, breeding more and more excuses. The business trips that stretched longer each time, always to cities she had never visited with him. The way Marcus flinched when she touched him unexpectedly, as if her hands were something to be endured rather than welcomed. The phone calls he took in another room, speaking in hushed tones that stopped the moment she appeared in the doorway. But she told herself she was paranoid, pregnancy hormones, overthinking. Every article she read said that women in their 3rd trimester often experienced anxiety, mood swings, irrational fears. She was so desperate to believe in the life she thought she had that she had talked herself out of trusting her own instincts. Eleanor Mitchell had spent 10 years as an investigative journalist before she married Marcus Reeves. She had uncovered corporate fraud, exposed corrupt politicians, brought down a pharmaceutical company that was hiding data about dangerous side effects. She had won awards for her work. She had been good at her job, really good, the kind of reporter that sources trusted and editors respected. But when Marcus asked her to give it up, to become what he called a proper wife, she had agreed. She had traded bylines for dinner parties, breaking stories for breaking bread with his business associates. She had convinced herself it was a fair exchange for love, for security, for the family they were building together. Now, standing at the window of the house that his money had bought, watching snow fall onto the lawn that his landscapers maintained, wearing the designer maternity dress that his credit card had paid for, Eleanor wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Her phone buzzed. She grabbed it too quickly, hating herself for the eagerness, for the hope that still flickered despite everything. A text from Marcus. Emergency board meeting. Tokyo investors flew in unexpectedly. Don't wait up? Sorry, baby. Love you. Eleanor read the message twice, 3 times. Her fingers trembled as she typed back. It's Christmas Eve. 3 dots appeared on the screen, indicating he was typing a response. Eleanor watched them pulse, waiting, hoping for some explanation that would make sense, that would ease the knot in her stomach. The dots disappeared. No message came. She set the phone down on the table and stared at his empty chair, at the velvet-wrapped gift she had spent weeks choosing, a vintage Rolex she had found at an estate sale, the same model his father had worn. Marcus had mentioned once, years ago, that his father's watch had been lost when his parents divorced. She had remembered. She had searched. She had thought it would mean something. Now she was not so sure anything meant anything at all. The candles continued to burn, melting down to nothing. The beef Wellington grew cold in the oven. The chocolate souffle collapsed into a sad, deflated mess. And Eleanor stood at the window, watching snow fall, feeling her carefully constructed life begin to crack at the seams. By 8 o'clock, Eleanor had tried calling Marcus 4 times. Each call went straight to voicemail, his smooth, professional voice inviting her to leave a message that he would return at his earliest convenience. She considered driving to his office. She had done it before, in the early years of their marriage, surprising him with dinner when he worked late. But the snow was coming down harder now, and her doctor had warned her about unnecessary stress in her final trimester. Besides, if he was really in a meeting with Tokyo investors, showing up unannounced would embarrass him. Marcus hated being embarrassed. Instead, she opened her laptop to send him an email. Maybe he would see it faster than a text, check it between agenda items, feel a pang of guilt about leaving his pregnant wife alone on Christmas Eve. That was when she noticed something strange. Marcus's email account was still logged in from that morning. He must have forgotten to sign out after using her computer to print a document, something about quarterly projections that needed his signature. Eleanor knew she should close the browser. She knew that looking through her husband's private correspondence was a violation of trust, the kind of thing that could never be taken back. Marriages were built on faith, on the willingness to believe in each other even when belief was hard. If she started snooping through his emails, she would be admitting that faith was gone. But something in her gut, that old journalistic instinct she had tried so hard to bury, told her to keep reading. The instinct that had helped her break a dozen major stories. The instinct that had never been wrong. She clicked on his inbox. The first message was a confirmation from a hotel she had never heard of. The Meridian Manhattan, penthouse suite, December 24th through December 25th. Tonight, Christmas Eve. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She clicked again, then again. A trail of emails unfurled before her like evidence in a case she had never wanted to investigate. Restaurant reservations at places she had never been to. La Bernardine, 11 Madison Park. Per se, all of them restaurants Marcus had said were overrated, not worth the hype, certainly not worth the wait for a table. Jewelry receipts for pieces she had never received. A diamond bracelet from Tiffany's. A pearl necklace from Harry Winston. An emerald ring from a boutique in Soho. Thousands and thousands of dollars spent on jewelry that had never touched her skin. And then the messages. Dozens of them, stretching back months and months, to someone saved in his contacts only as JC. The words on the screen blurred and sharpened as Eleanor read. her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. You looked gorgeous at the meeting. I could barely concentrate. I wish I could wake up next to you every morning. Soon, I promise, just a little longer." Then she found the photo, Marcus and a younger woman, faces close together, unmistakably intimate. They were on a beach somewhere tropical, palm trees visible in the background. The kind of vacation spot Marcus always said was too crowded, too touristy for his taste. He was looking at the woman the way he used to look at Eleanor, back when looking at her still seemed to bring him joy. The woman was wearing a necklace Eleanor recognized immediately, a delicate gold chain with a small diamond pendant, an anniversary gift Marcus had claimed to have lost 6 months ago. At the time, she had believed him. She had felt guilty for being upset about a piece of jewelry when he had seemed so genuinely distressed about losing it. Eleanor zoomed in on the woman's face. Her heart stopped. She knew this woman. She had met her at company events, had made small talk with her at the holiday party last year, had complimented her shoes and asked about her weekend plans. Jessica Cole, Vice President of Marketing at Reeves Capital Holdings. Jessica, who always smiled so sweetly, who asked about the baby, who complimented Eleanor's dress while apparently wearing Eleanor's necklace to bed with Eleanor's husband. Eleanor scrolled through more emails, more photos, more evidence of a betrayal so comprehensive, so carefully maintained, that she could hardly process what she was seeing. 18 months. The affair had been going on for 18 months. It had started before she got pregnant, before they decided to try for a baby, before all those nights when Marcus had held her and talked about the family they were building together. Jessica had been at her baby shower. She had sat in Eleanor's living room drinking champagne that Eleanor could not drink, eating cake that Eleanor had baked, touching Eleanor's belly, and saying she could not wait to meet the little one. And the whole time she had been sleeping with Eleanor's husband. Eleanor made it to the bathroom just before she was sick. She sat on the cold tile floor afterward, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The baby kicked frantically, responding to her mother's distress in the only way she knew how. Eleanor wrapped her arms around her belly and rocked back and forth, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to understand how her life had come apart so completely in the space of an hour. Her phone buzzed somewhere in the distance. She heard it but could not make herself move, could not make herself care. The woman who had answered every text within minutes, who had always been available, who had organized her entire life around being the wife Marcus wanted, that woman was gone. In her place was someone else, someone broken, someone betrayed. How long she stayed on that bathroom floor, she did not know. Time had become meaningless, a construct that belonged to a world where her marriage still existed, where her husband still loved her, where Christmas Eve still meant something other than the night her life fell apart. Eventually her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from her friend Rachel. "Hey, saw Marcus at the Meridian rooftop party on someone's Instagram story. Thought he was supposed to be with you tonight? Weird. Call me?" There was a link below the message. Eleanor's hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped, replaced by something colder, something harder. A feeling she remembered from her reporting days, the calm that descended when a story finally came together, when all the pieces fell into place and the truth emerged from the chaos. She clicked the link. Someone's Instagram story showed a rooftop party, champagne glasses catching the light, the Manhattan skyline glistering behind elegant guests in expensive clothes. Beautiful people laughing and toasting to something Eleanor would never be part of. And there, in the background of a stranger's selfie, was her husband, his arm around Jessica Cole. Both of them laughing like people without a care in the world. Both of them looking at each other with the kind of intimacy that left no room for doubt. Eleanor screenshot everything. Then she did something she had not done in years, not since she was a young journalist in over her head on her first big story, convinced she was about to get fired or sued or both. She called her mother. Virginia Mitchell answered on the second ring. Even at this hour, even on Christmas Eve, her voice was alert, focused, ready for whatever was coming. 30 years as a federal prosecutor had taught Virginia to be prepared for anything. "Ellie, what's wrong?" "Mom," Eleanor's voice cracked on the word. All the strength she had been holding on to, All the cold determination dissolved at the sound of her mother's voice. I need you to come over, please. Right now. I'm on my way. Virginia did not ask questions. She did not need explanations. She heard the devastation in her daughter's voice and responded the way she always had, with action, with presence, with the fierce protective love that had carried Eleanor through every crisis of her life. 45 minutes later, Virginia Mitchell stamped snow off her boots in the entryway of her daughter's house. She took one look at Eleanor's face, at the mascara streaked down her cheeks, at the way she was holding herself like something inside her had broken, and opened her arms without a word. Eleanor collapsed into the embrace. She did not cry anymore. She was past crying now, but she held on like a drowning woman, clinging to a life raft. Virginia smelled like the same perfume she had worn Eleanor's entire life, a scent that meant safety, that meant home, that meant someone was finally here to help. When Eleanor finally pulled back, she showed her mother everything. The emails, the photos, the Instagram story, the evidence of an affair that had been conducted right under her nose, in her own home, at her own parties, with her own jewelry. Virginia's face hardened with recognition as she scrolled through the evidence. Not surprise, Eleanor noticed. Recognition. As if she had seen this story before. This is what your father's partner did to me, Virginia said quietly. Different man. Same playbook. Eleanor had heard the story before, in fragments and allusions, never the complete version, how her father's business partner had tried to destroy Virginia 30 years ago, how he had painted her as hysterical, unstable, unfit, how he had turned their friends against her, poisoned her professional reputation, nearly destroyed her career before it had even begun, how it had taken her decades to rebuild what that man had tried to burn down. What do I do? Eleanor asked. Virginia took her daughter's hands. Her grip was strong, steady, grounding. Tonight, nothing. You're 8 months pregnant and in shock. Tomorrow, we plan. But Ellie, her grip tightened. I need you to hear me clearly. Do not confront him. Not yet. Men like this, they're most dangerous when they feel cornered, and they're most vulnerable when they feel safe. Eleanor looked at her mother, at the steel in her eyes, at the wisdom that had been forged in fire. What do you mean, vulnerable? I mean, he doesn't know you know. That's your only advantage right now. The moment you confront him, you lose it. He'll spin a story, get his lawyers involved for it, start moving money around. But if he thinks you're still the trusting wife, if he feels safe, he'll keep making mistakes. And those mistakes will be your weapons. Eleanor thought about the woman she had been that morning, setting the table for a romantic dinner, wrapping gifts with careful attention, believing in a marriage that had been dead for years. She thought about the woman she was now, sitting in her mother's arms, holding evidence of betrayal on a phone that suddenly felt like a weapon. Okay, she whispered. I'll wait. Marcus came home at 2 in the morning, reeking of perfume that was not Eleanor's and champagne that she had not poured. He moved through the house with the careless confidence of a man who believed his secrets were safe, who had never once considered that his wife might be awake, might be watching, might be cataloging every detail of his late arrival. Eleanor lay in bed with her eyes closed, her breathing steady, pretending to sleep. It was the first of many performances she would give in the months to come, the first mask she would wear in a long masquerade. He slipped under the covers beside her and whispered, Sorry I'm so late. Those Tokyo meetings ran forever. She said nothing. Her heart beat steadily in her chest, slow and calm, when it should have been racing. The baby kicked once, twice, then settled. Even her daughter seemed to understand that stillness was required now, that survival depended on silence. Marcus fell asleep within minutes. The sleep of the guilt-free, Eleanor thought. The sleep of a man who believed his lies were bulletproof, his carefully constructed narrative unassailable. He did not know that his wife was lying beside him wide awake, her mind racing through possibilities and plans. She lay there until dawn, hand on her belly, watching the first gray light of Christmas morning creep across the ceiling. The woman who had trusted blindly was gone. In her place was someone older, someone harder, someone who had remembered a truth she had tried to forget for 12 years. She had spent a decade as an investigative journalist, getting powerful men to reveal their secrets. She had built careers on her ability to find the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. She had brought down executives and politicians, exposed liars and cheats, held the powerful accountable for their crimes. Her husband was about to become her last assignment. Christmas morning arrived with deceptive cheer. The snow had stopped during the night, leaving the world covered in pristine white that sparkled in the winter sunlight. Cardinals hopped along the back fence, bright spots of red against the snow. The neighbors' children shrieked with joy as they tested their new sleds on the hill at the end of the street. Inside the Reeves house, Marcus was charming, attentive, everything a devoted husband should be. He made Eleanor's favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes with fresh strawberries and real maple syrup. He cleaned up the kitchen without being asked. He opened presents with exaggerated enthusiasm, oohing and eyeing over the Rolex she had spent months finding, the gift that now felt like a cruel joke. "Baby, this is incredible," he said, turning the watch over in his hands, examining the vintage face with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "Where did you even find this?" "Estate sale in Connecticut," Eleanor said, watching him carefully. "I remembered you saying your dad had one like it." Something flickered across his face, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Then his smile was back, warm and grateful. "You're amazing, you know that. I don't deserve you." "No," she thought, "you really don't." He rubbed her belly and talked to the baby in the sully voice that used to make her laugh. "Your daddy loves this watch so much," he cooed, "and your daddy is so excited to meet you. Just a few more weeks and you'll be here. We're going to have the best life together, aren't we?" "Yes, we are." Eleanor smiled. "You're so good with her already." "I had practice with you," Marcus said, kissing her forehead. "I'm sorry about last night, Elle. This deal is just so important. After the IPO, things will calm down, I promise. New year, new start." "I understand," she said. And she did understand. She understood everything now. She understood that every kiss was a performance, every endearment a lie, every promise a manipulation designed to keep her docile and trusting while he lived his real life somewhere else. She understood that she had been a fool for 12 years, and she understood that her foolishness was about to end. The days between Christmas and New Year passed in a blur of pretense. Eleanor played the role of happy wife with the skill of a trained actress, smiling at Marcus's jokes, cooking his favorite meals, never letting her mask slip for even a moment. At night, when he fell asleep beside her, she lay awake planning, researching, preparing for the battle ahead. 3 days after Christmas, while Marcus was at the office catching up on work, Eleanor slipped out of the house for a meeting she had arranged in secret. She drove herself to a small office building in Stamford, far enough from Greenwich that she was unlikely to run into anyone who knew her, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. David Miller's law office was modest but professional. Diplomas on the wall, family photos on the desk, the kind of place that suggested competence without ostentation. Eleanor had chosen him specifically because he had no connection to her husband's business circles, because his office was in a building Marcus would never visit, because he came highly recommended by her mother's network of professional contacts. David was a small man in his 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, in a manner that suggested he had seen enough human suffering to be unsurprised by anything. He shook Eleanor's hand, gestured for her to sit, and waited patiently while she collected herself enough to begin. "I need to understand my options," Eleanor said, "in case I decide to file for divorce." David nodded. "Do you have a copy of your prenuptial agreement?" Eleanor handed over the document she had spent hours searching for in Marcus's home office, hidden in a locked drawer to which she had eventually found the key. David reviewed it with growing concern, his face telling her everything she needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "Eleanor," he said carefully, "this is one of the most aggressive prenuptial agreements I've ever seen. In the event of divorce initiated by you, you receive a one-time payment of $50,000. No ongoing support, no claim to any assets acquired during the marriage, regardless of your contribution to the household or his career." "I was 25, Eleanor said. "I was in love. His lawyer said it was standard." "There's more." David flipped to another section of the document. "If you are found to have committed adultery, you receive nothing at all. Not even the 50,000, but there's no equivalent clause for him. He could have affairs with half of Manhattan, and it wouldn't affect the financial settlement one bit. That can't be legal. It's unethical, David said, but it's legal, you signed it. He paused, flipping to yet another section. There's one more clause I need to make you aware of. In the event of disputed custody, primary residence defaults to the higher-earning parent unless criminal conduct is proven, with his resources and your current lack thereof. Eleanor felt the room tilt beneath her. He could take my baby. He could try, and with enough lawyers and enough money, he might succeed. Eleanor sat in David's office for another hour, learning the full extent of the trap she had walked into 12 years ago. Marcus had not just planned an affair. He had planned an escape route, a legal fortress built when she had been too young and too in love to recognize what she was signing away. The depth of his calculation took her breath away. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor discovered just how deep that calculation went. Rachel called on January 5th, her voice troubled. Rachel Torres had been Eleanor's best friend since their freshman year of college, 20 years of shared secrets and supported dreams. They had been bridesmaids at each other's weddings. They had held each other through breakups and bereavements, career setbacks and personal tragedies. If there was anyone in the world Eleanor trusted completely, it was Rachel. Ellie, I need to tell you something, Rachel said. I wasn't going to say anything, but it's been bothering me for weeks. Eleanor braced herself. After everything she had already learned, she was not sure anything could shock her anymore. What is it? Marcus took me to lunch last month, said he was worried about you, that you'd been having paranoid episodes, mood swings. He asked me to keep an eye on you and let him know if I noticed anything concerning. Eleanor felt ice spreading through her veins. What did you say? I said pregnancy can be stressful and I'd check in with you more often. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but then I started remembering other conversations, other things people have said. Rachel trailed off. Ellie, I think he's been telling everyone you're losing it. Eleanor made more calls after she hung up with Rachel. Each one revealed another piece of the puzzle. Her OBGYN had received a call from Marcus expressing concern about her mental state. He had asked very gently whether certain medications might be appropriate for pregnant women experiencing delusions. Her book club friends had been told in confidence that Eleanor was struggling emotionally, that the pregnancy had been harder than expected, that they should be understanding if she seemed distant or said anything strange. Marcus's mother had sent a sympathy card about Eleanor's difficult pregnancy, which Eleanor had never received because Marcus had intercepted the mail. He had been building a narrative for months, maybe years, planting seeds of doubt in every corner of her life, so that when the divorce happened, when Eleanor tried to tell her side of the story, everyone would already believe she was unstable. Virginia connected the dots with the cold precision of a former federal prosecutor. This isn't just an affair, Ellie. This is a coordinated campaign to discredit you. When the divorce happens, everyone will already believe you're crazy before you can tell them the truth. But why? Eleanor asked. Why would he go this far? Virginia pulled up news on her tablet, showing her daughter the financial pages she rarely read anymore. Reeves Capital is going public in 8 months. The IPO is projected to value the company at over $2 billion. If you divorce him with proof of his affair, the scandal could tank the whole thing. Board members would resign, investors would pull out. His reputation as a family man, a trustworthy leader, would be destroyed. So he needs me to be the villain. He needs the world to think you're a madwoman before you have a chance to expose him. That way, when you tell the truth, nobody will believe you. They'll just see a bitter, unstable ex-wife trying to destroy her successful husband. Eleanor thought about all the lunches Marcus had arranged, all the concerned phone calls he had made, all the subtle manipulation that had been going on right under her nose. She thought about how carefully he had constructed this trap, how patiently he had waited for her to walk into it. She had underestimated him. She would not make that mistake again. On January 15th, Eleanor attended the Reeves Capital Winter Gala on Marcus's arm. She wore her best maternity dress, a designer gown that cost more than her first car. She styled her hair the way he liked it. She practiced her smile in the mirror until it looked genuine. The gala was held in a ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, all crystal chandeliers and champagne towers and women dripping with diamonds. These were Marcus's people, the investors and executives and board members who had made him rich. They shook his hand and clapped his back and told him how excited they were about the IP. Eleanor played the role of perfect pregnant wife, smiling until her face ached, making small talk about nursery colors and baby names while her mind cataloged every detail. She watched Marcus work the room, charming and confident, and saw him for what he really was: a performer, a liar, a man who wore masks as easily as other men wore ties. Then she spotted Jessica across the ballroom. The mistress was wearing a new necklace tonight, emeralds that caught the light when she moved. She looked beautiful, Eleanor had to admit. Young and confident and completely at ease among the wealthy elite. She was laughing at something someone had said, her hand resting casually on a colleague's arm. No sign of guilt or shame anywhere on her perfectly made-up face. Jessica caught Eleanor's eye across the room and, unbelievably, smiled. Then she excused herself from her conversation and walked over, champagne glass in hand. "Eleanor, you look radiant. How are you feeling? The baby must be almost here." "Any day now," Eleanor said pleasantly. Her voice was calm, her expression friendly. Inside, she was imagining wrapping her hands around Jessica's throat. Marcus must be so excited. He talks about the baby constantly. "I bet he does," Eleanor thought. "I bet he tells you all about how trapped he feels, how he can't wait to be free, how the baby is just another complication in his complicated life." "He's been wonderful," Eleanor said. "Very supportive." Jessica studied Eleanor for a moment, something calculating behind her pretty eyes. Then she smiled again, wider this time. "That's a beautiful dress. Is that last season? I have one just like it." "Well, had. I gave it to Goodwill months ago. Closet space, you know." The insult was subtle enough that no one overhearing would recognize it as such. But Eleanor heard the message loud and clear. "You're old. You're outdated. You're being replaced." "I love your necklace," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Emeralds suit you." "Thank you, a gift from an admirer. He has good taste. Those look like they're from Cartier. The Panthère collection, if I'm not wrong. Beautiful stones." Eleanor paused, letting her words land. "I almost got a pair like that for our anniversary, but Marcus said emeralds were too flashy for someone my age." Jessica's smile flickered just for a moment. Then it was back, bright and brittle. "Well, different tastes for different stages of life, I suppose." She excused herself a moment later, disappearing into the crowd. Eleanor watched her go, then turned back to the party, her face revealing nothing. Later that evening, Eleanor positioned herself where she could observe without being obvious. She watched Marcus and Jessica exchange glances across the ballroom room. Brief, professional-looking to anyone who was not watching closely. But Eleanor saw it now, the secret language, the stolen moments, the whole elaborate dance of an affair conducted in plain sight. She photographed everything with the phone hidden in her clutch. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every person who seemed to notice Marcus and Jessica together and look away, uncomfortable with what they were seeing but unwilling to say anything. She was building her file, gathering her evidence, preparing for war. Then the cramps started. They came without warning, sharp and urgent, doubling Eleanor over in the middle of the ballroom. Her champagne glass shattered on the marble floor. Someone screamed, someone called for help. The crowd parted around her like water around a stone. Eleanor felt wetness between her legs and knew with terrible certainty that something was very wrong. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and fear. Premature labor at 36 weeks. The baby in distress. Words like blood pressure and emergency intervention and possible C-section flying around her head while she lay strapped to a gurney, alone and terrified. Virginia was stuck in traffic on I-95. Rachel was in Chicago for work. Marcus did not answer his phone. For 7 hours, Eleanor lay in a cold hospital room, surrounded by machines, their beeping and humming the only company she had. The doctors worked to stop the labor, to save the baby, to keep Eleanor from losing everything she had left to lose. At 10 in the morning, the doctor finally delivered news. They had stopped the labor. The baby was stable. But Eleanor would need to remain on strict bed rest until she gave birth. Any stress, any exertion, any emotional upset, could trigger early delivery again. Mrs. Reeves, the doctor said gently, your blood pressure is dangerously high. For your sake and the baby's, you need to eliminate all sources of stress from your life. Eleanor almost laughed. It came out as a sob. Marcus finally arrived at 11, full of apologies and explanations. His phone had been on silent. He came as fast as he could. The traffic was terrible. He was so worried. Is the baby okay? Is Eleanor okay? What did the doctors say? He sat beside her bed and held her hand. He stroked her hair and murmured reassurances. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm here now. Everything's going to be fine. But through the door, past Marcus's shoulder, Eleanor glimpsed Jessica Cole standing in the hallway. Just for a moment, just long enough to know where Marcus had really been when his phone was supposedly silent. Just long enough to understand that even now, even with his wife in a hospital bed fighting to save their daughter's life, he had brought his mistress along for the ride. Eleanor closed her eyes and said nothing. She was trapped now. She could not fight. She could not run. She could not even stand up without risking her daughter's life. Marcus had her exactly where he wanted her, helpless, dependent, and thoroughly discredited in the eyes of everyone who mattered. For the first time since this nightmare began, Eleanor was truly afraid. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She glanced at it, expecting spam, expecting nothing. The message read, I know what he's doing to you. I can help. CW. Eleanor stared at the screen for a long moment. Then with fingers that trembled only slightly, she typed back. Who are you? The reply came instantly. Someone who's been where you are. Someone who wants to see the Reeves family pay for what they've done. Trust me. Eleanor did not trust anyone anymore, but she was running out of options, and desperation made strange bedfellows. Tell me more, she typed. And so the alliance began. The mysterious CW revealed herself 4 days later, slipping into Eleanor's bedroom at Virginia's apartment while Marcus was safely at work, believing his wife was resting peacefully under her mother's watchful eye. Christine Wells was 58 years old, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of face that had clearly been beautiful once, before years of bitterness and disappointment carved new lines around her mouth and eyes. She wore expensive clothes that hung on her frame as if they had been bought for someone slightly larger, someone who had once carried herself with more confidence. She sat in the chair beside Eleanor's bed like someone who had been waiting a very long time for this moment. Her eyes, pale blue and sharp, studied Eleanor with an intensity that felt almost uncomfortable. I was married to Marcus's father for 7 years, Christine said without preamble. Same playbook. Charm, control, discard. When I tried to divorce him, he destroyed me completely. Took everything I had, painted me as a gold digger and a liar in front of everyone who mattered. I've spent 15 years waiting for a chance to expose that family for what they really are. Eleanor studied the older woman. There was something familiar in her face, a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. The look of someone who had been fighting a battle so long, she had forgotten what peace felt like. Why come to me now, Saren? Because I see myself in you. The smart woman who gave up everything for a man who was never worth it. The mother who will do anything to protect her child. The fighter who doesn't know yet just how strong she really is. Christine leaned forward. And because watching the Reeves empire burn would be the best Christmas gift I could ever receive, she placed a USB drive on Eleanor's bedside table. Such a small thing, no bigger than a tube of lipstick, to contain so much potential devastation. Before my divorce, Christine continued, I copied everything I could get my hands on. Financial records, shell company documents, hidden account numbers. The Reeves family has been laundering money for decades, hiding assets from the IRS, defrauding investors. This is enough to bring them all down, but I was never in a position to use it. A bitter ex-wife with no credibility, no connections, no one willing to believe her. You're different. How am I different? You're the wrong pregnant wife of the Golden Boy CEO. You're sympathetic, believable, and you still have connections, friends in the media, sources who remember the journalist you used to be. When you tell this story, people will listen. Eleanor picked up the USB drive, turning it over in her fingers. Why didn't you take this to the authorities years ago? Christine's laugh was bitter. Hollow. I tried. God, did I try. I went to the FBI, the SEC, the IRS. Do you know what they told me? They said they needed corroborating evidence. They said the word of a bitter ex-wife wasn't enough to launch an investigation. They said I should move on with my life. She shook her head. Move on, as if I could ever move on from what they did to me. What did they do? They took my reputation, my friends, my career, my sanity almost. By the time the divorce was final, I was so broken I could barely get out of bed. It took me years to rebuild even a fraction of what I had before. Eleanor thought about the narrative Marcus had been building against her. The whispers of instability, the concerned phone calls, the sympathetic looks from people who believed she was losing her mind. He's doing the same thing to me, she said quietly, telling everyone I'm crazy. Of course he is, it's the family playbook. Discredit the woman before she can tell the truth. Make everyone question her sanity so no one will question his story. Christine's eyes met Eleanor's. But you have something I didn't have. You have evidence of his affair. You have a mother who was a federal prosecutor. And now you have me. Over the following weeks, Eleanor's bedroom became a war room. Virginia took charge of strategy, bringing the same methodical precision to this fight that had made her legendary in courtrooms across the country. She created timelines, identified weaknesses, planned contingencies for every possible scenario. Rachel analyzed the USB drive's contents remotely, her forensic accounting skills finally being put to use for something more important than corporate audits. The guilt she felt over her lunch with Marcus drove her to work around the clock, determined to find something that would make up for her unwitting betrayal. David Miller provided legal guidance, visiting Eleanor's bedside with updates on custody law and divorce strategy. His initial skepticism had transformed into something like admiration as he realized the scope of what they were dealing with. And Christine provided inside knowledge, filling in gaps that the documents could not explain, adding context and history that made the patterns of corruption impossible to deny. Rachel's findings were explosive. There are offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands totaling $47 million, she reported during one of their video calls, her face tight with disbelief. Shell companies in Delaware, Nevada, and the British Virgin Islands all used to hide assets from tax authorities. Evidence of investor fraud dating back over a decade, inflated valuations, hidden debts, the whole 9 yards. This isn't just divorce leverage, Virginia said grimly. This is federal crime territory. David nodded, which means we have two options. Use this to negotiate a fair divorce settlement quietly. Keep everything out of the press and the courts. Walk away with what you're owed, or blow the whistle on all of it and watch everything burn. Everyone turned to look at Eleanor. She thought about the woman she had been a month ago, setting the table for a Christmas dinner that would never happen. She thought about the woman she wanted to become, the woman her daughter would grow up to know. She thought about justice and revenge and the thin line between them. I don't want revenge, she said finally. I want my daughter to be safe. I want what I'm owed after 12 years of marriage. And I want Marcus to admit just once that he lied, that everything he said was a lie. If we approach this right, David said carefully, we might be able to get all three. If you are listening to this story and you have ever trusted someone who did not deserve your trust, if you have ever discovered that the person you loved was not who you thought they were, then perhaps you understand what Eleanor felt in those long nights on bed rest. The rage that burned like acid in her stomach, the grief that came in waves, unexpected and overwhelming, the desperate need to make sense of how love could curdle into something so cruel. What would you do in her position? Would you take the settlement and walk away, start over somewhere far from the wreckage? Would you burn it all down, damn the consequences? Or would you do what Eleanor did, plan your revenge with the patience of someone who had learned the hard way that powerful men are most vulnerable when they feel most safe? On March 1st, Eleanor summoned Marcus to what she called a serious conversation. She was still on bed rest, but stronger now, clearer. The fog of shock and grief had burned away, leaving only cold determination. Marcus arrived with the expression of a man humoring a difficult child. He had brought flowers, yellow roses, her supposed favorite. He had never bothered to learn that she actually preferred peonies. He sat in the chair beside her bed, the same chair where Christine had sat weeks earlier, and waited with exaggerated patience. His phone buzzed every few minutes, but he ignored it, performing attentiveness with the skill of long practice. "What's this about, Elle?" "I know about Jessica." Something flickered across his face. Shock, then fear, then rapid calculation, then settling into practiced concern. The whole sequence took less than a second, but Eleanor saw it. She had spent 12 years learning to read this man. Now she was finally using that knowledge against him. "Ellie, whatever you think you saw, I have emails, photos, 18 months of evidence. I also have financial records that would make the SEC very interested in Reeves' Capital." His mask slipped on further. "Where did you get—" "Doesn't matter." Eleanor's voice was steady, calm, a journalist interviewing a hostile source. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me a fair divorce, 50% of marital assets, full custody of our daughter, and a public statement accepting responsibility for the end of our marriage." "You're bluffing." Eleanor slid a folder across the bed. She had prepared it carefully, just enough evidence to prove she was serious, not enough to show all her cards. Let him think he knew what she had. Let him underestimate what was still hidden. Marcus opened the folder. His face went white as he flipped through the pages. Bank statements, offshore account numbers, photos of him and Jessica at restaurants, at hotels, at the beach vacation he had told Eleanor was a business trip. "I spent 10 years as an investigative journalist, Marcus. You made me quit, but you couldn't make me forget how. Do we have a deal?" Long silence. Marcus's jaw worked as he processed what he was seeing, calculated odds, weighed options. Eleanor watched him think, watched him realize that his carefully constructed trap had been turned against him. "I'll have my lawyers draw up papers," he said finally. He left without another word. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to win her back or beg forgiveness. Just cold capitulation from a man who had realized he was outmaneuvered. Eleanor exhaled for the first time in months. She thought she had won. She thought the leverage was enough. She had forgotten the first rule of investigating powerful men. They do not surrender. They regroup. They counterattack. They use every weapon at their disposal to destroy anyone who threatens their power. 2 days later, at 3 in the morning, Eleanor woke to pounding on the door. Police officers stood in the hallway outside Virginia's apartment, their faces professionally blank. Behind them were men in suits, FBI badges clipped to their pockets. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows, painting the walls in garish stripes. "Eleanor Reeves, we have a warrant for your arrest. You're being charged with corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud." "What? That's impossible." "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." As they led her out in her bathrobe, her belly huge and obvious, Eleanor saw Marcus standing at the end of the hallway. His face was a mask of concern, but his eyes were triumphant. "Officers, please be careful with her. She's pregnant and clearly not well mentally." The USB drive had been a trap. Marcus had known about Christine for years. He had been watching her, waiting, knowing that eventually she would try to use what she had stolen. He had just needed someone to take the bait, someone who could be blamed, someone whose downfall would also eliminate the last person who could threaten him. Eleanor had been perfect, the wronged wife seeking justice, the unstable woman everyone already suspected of paranoia. Walking directly into the snare he had laid, dragging Christine down with her. Christine Wells was arrested the same night. Eleanor sat in a holding cell, hand on her belly, watching her careful plan crumble into dust. She was not just fighting for a divorce anymore. She was fighting to stay out of prison and keep her daughter. The holding cell was cold and gray, the bench beneath Eleanor hard and unforgiving. She sat with her hands clasped over her belly, feeling the baby kick and turn, oblivious to the disaster unfolding around them. Virginia had been called. David Miller was on his way. But for these few hours, Eleanor was alone with her thoughts and the slow-dawning realization of just how badly she had miscalculated. Marcus had not just outmaneuvered her. He had used her to eliminate the last person who could threaten him. Christine, who had spent 15 years gathering evidence and waiting for justice, was now sitting in a cell somewhere in this same building. Because of Eleanor. Because Eleanor had trusted the wrong person at the wrong time. No, because Eleanor had been desperate enough to trust anyone who offered hope. David Miller arrived at dawn, his face grave. Virginia followed close behind, her prosecutor's mask firmly in place, despite the fear in her eyes. "The charges are serious," David said without preamble. "Corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, conspiracy to commit securities fraud. If convicted, you're looking at 15 to 20 years." Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her. But the information was accurate. Everything in those files was true. That doesn't matter. How you obtained it does. Christine stole those documents during her divorce proceedings 15 years ago. By accepting them, by planning to use them, you became complicit in that theft. And Marcus knew. Virginia's voice was flat, controlled. He knew Christine had those files. He knew she was looking for someone to help her use them. He's probably known for years. "He set the whole thing up," Eleanor said. "The affair, the baby, Mirasta, and all of it was part of his plan." "I don't think the baby was planned," David said carefully. "But once you got pregnant, it gave him the perfect opportunity. A wife who could be painted as unstable, emotional, irrational. A pregnancy that gave him sympathy while giving you stress. And now this, the crazy pregnant woman who tried to destroy her successful husband." Eleanor closed her eyes. The baby kicked, hard, as if protesting the injustice of it all. "What are my options?" "Short term, we get you out on bail. I've already started the process. With your mother's assets and your ties to the community, the judge should agree. Long term," David hesitated. "We need to prove you were set up. We need evidence of Marcus's role in orchestrating this. And right now, we don't have that." Virginia posted bail using her retirement savings. It took everything she had, every dollar she had set aside for her final years. But she did it without hesitation. Eleanor would spend the rest of her life trying to repay that debt. But the bad news did not stop there. 5 days after Eleanor's release, David Miller arrived at Virginia's apartment with an expression that made Eleanor's stomach drop before he said a single word. "Marcus filed an emergency custody motion this morning." "What?" "He's requesting that upon birth, your daughter be immediately placed in his custody pending resolution of your criminal charges. He's arguing that you're a flight risk with criminal ties, that your mental instability makes you a danger to the child, and that he's the only parent capable of providing a stable environment." Eleanor felt like she was drowning. "He can't do that. He can try. He has character witnesses lined up to testify. Colleagues, friends, even your doctor." "My doctor?" "Dr. Harrison is prepared to testify about concerns over your emotional volatility during the pregnancy. Apparently, Marcus expressed concerns to her office multiple times over the past few months. Every person Marcus had seeded with lies, every concerned lunch and worried phone call and sympathetic conversation was now a weapon pointed directly at Eleanor's heart. The narrative he had been building for months was coming to fruition, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "The judge granted a temporary hearing for next month," David continued. "If the ruling goes against you, Marcus will have custody of Grace the moment she's born. You'll have visitation rights at best. Supervised visitation, probably." Eleanor imagined handing her newborn daughter to Marcus. Imagined watching Jessica Cole hold her baby, playing the role of loving stepmother while Eleanor stood on the sidelines. Imagine Grace growing up in that house, absorbing those lies, learning to see her mother as the monster Marcus painted her to be. "There has to be something we can do." There is, but it means proving Marcus orchestrated this whole thing. And right now, the only person who could corroborate that is Christine Wells, who is facing her own charges and has every reason to lie. 5 days later, Rachel Torres came to Virginia's apartment. She could not meet Eleanor's eyes. "Marcus's lawyers contacted me yesterday." Eleanor felt ice forming in her stomach. "What did they want?" "They know about my brother, Diego's visa situation. His work permit expired 3 months ago, and we've been trying to get it renewed, but..." Rachel's voice broke. They said if I don't cooperate as a witness for Marcus, they'll have him deported. What did they ask you to say? That you told me you wanted to destroy Marcus, that you manipulated Christine into helping you, that the whole thing was your idea from the beginning. Rachel, we have been friends for 20 years. I know. Rachel was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I haven't agreed yet. But Diego has a family, Ellie. He has kids. They were born here. They're American citizens. But if he gets deported, so you're choosing him over me. Rachel finally looked up. Her eyes were red, her face swollen with grief. I'm choosing my family the same way you'd choose Grace. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you do anything to protect your daughter? Eleanor wanted to argue. She wanted to rage, to scream, to demand loyalty after 20 years of friendship. But she looked at Rachel's face, at the agony there, and she understood. Rachel was not the enemy. Rachel was another victim. What would you do, Eleanor asked quietly, if you were me? I would find another way. Rachel wiped her eyes. I would remember that Marcus's greatest weapon is making everyone feel like they have no choices, and I would prove him wrong. She left a few minutes later. Eleanor sat alone in the silence, feeling the last support beam of her life crack and crumble. The worst blow came 10 days later. Eleanor was lying in bed, too exhausted and too hopeless to do anything but stare at the ceiling, when Virginia turned on the television. A morning show, bright and cheerful, the host chatting about celebrity gossip and holiday recipes. Then the segment changed, and Marcus Reeves appeared on screen. He looked perfect, of course, handsome and polished in a designer suit. His face arranged in an expression of wounded dignity, a man bravely facing public scrutiny for the sake of his unborn child. Beside him sat Jessica Cole. Eleanor felt her heart stop. This has been the most difficult time of my life, Marcus was saying, his voice steady and sincere. I still love Eleanor. I wanted to protect her, to get her help for her mental health issues. But her obsession with destroying me, with fabricating evidence, and conspiring with my father's ex-wife, I had to protect myself. And more importantly, I had to protect our unborn child. The host nodded sympathetically. And Jessica, how did you get caught up in all this? Jessica dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The gesture looked rehearsed, but Eleanor doubted anyone else would notice. I was just trying to support Marcus through a difficult time. He was worried about his wife, and I offered a sympathetic ear. Eleanor became convinced we were having an affair. She started stalking me, threatening me, saying she was going to destroy us both. It's been terrifying. Do you have a message for Eleanor? Marcus looked directly into the camera. His eyes were warm, compassionate, the eyes of a man who had been hurt but refused to give up hope. I forgive you, Elle. I just want you to get the help you need. And when our daughter is born, I promise I'll give her all the love and stability she deserves. Eleanor turned off the television. She was due in 2 weeks. Her baby would be born into a world where her mother was painted as a criminal, a stalker, a madwoman. She had no evidence, no allies, and no hope. The snow fell outside the window. She watched it pile up, white and cold and indifferent to human suffering. For the first time since this nightmare began, Eleanor considered giving up. That night, Virginia found Eleanor standing at the window in her nightgown, dangerously still. Too calm, too quiet. Virginia's voice was sharp with fear. Step away from the window. Do you know what the worst part is? Eleanor did not turn around. Her voice was hollow, empty, the voice of someone who had already surrendered. He's going to tell her I was the monster. Every birthday, every Christmas, she'll grow up hating me. And by the time she's old enough to know the truth, she won't want to hear it. Eleanor, I was so stupid, Mom. I gave up everything for him. My career, my friends, my identity. I spent 12 years becoming exactly what he wanted, and then he threw me away anyway. What's the point of fighting? He has all the power. He has all the money. He has everyone believing his lies. Virginia crossed the room and grabbed her daughter's shoulders, turning her forcibly away from the window. Her grip was strong, fierce, almost painful. Listen to me. When I was your age, your father's partner tried to destroy me. He said I was crazy, hysterical, unfit. He took our money, our house, our reputation. Everyone believed him. I had nothing but a 3-year-old daughter and a law degree I hadn't used in years. What happened? I survived, day by day, hour by hour, sometimes minute by minute. I put myself through law school while working 2 jobs. I rebuilt everything from ash and pain. And 30 years later, I was the prosecutor who sent him to federal prison for fraud. That took 30 years. Justice doesn't run on our schedule, Ellie, but it runs. It always runs. The question isn't whether justice will come. The question is whether you'll be standing when it arrives. Virginia's hands tightened on Eleanor's shoulders. Marcus thinks he's already won. That's his weakness. That's where he's vulnerable. You're going to let him believe he's won while we find another way. Because that baby, she pointed to Eleanor's belly, deserves a mother who fights, even when it feels impossible. Especially when it feels impossible. Eleanor looked down at her belly. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, demanding attention. Okay, Eleanor whispered. Her voice was raw, broken, but there was something new beneath the damage. A spark that refused to die. Okay, I'll fight. On March 28th at 11:47 at night, after 18 hours of labor that felt like 18 years, Grace Eleanor Reeves entered the world. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, 10 fingers and 10 toes. A full head of dark hair, and a cry that filled the delivery room with the unmistakable sound of new life. The doctor placed her on Eleanor's chest, still warm and wet and perfect, and Eleanor felt something shift in the very center of her being. This was what it was all for. This tiny person, this miracle of blood and bone, this life that she had carried through the worst months of her existence. Grace was here. Grace was real. Grace was the only thing that mattered. Hi, baby girl, Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm your mama, and I'm going to protect you with everything I have. Virginia stood beside the bed, her own eyes wet, her hand gripping Eleanor's shoulder. The nurse moved quietly around them, cleaning up, recording vital signs, giving the new mother space to bond with her daughter. In that moment, there was no Marcus, no custody battle, no criminal charges. There was only this, a mother holding her child for the first time, making silent promises that she would keep for the rest of her life. The next morning, Marcus's lawyers delivered custody papers. Eleanor had 72 hours before they would enforce the temporary order. 72 hours to figure out how to keep her daughter. 72 hours before her baby could be taken from her arms and placed in the hands of the man who had orchestrated her destruction. Virginia and Eleanor did not flee. That would have violated bail, given Marcus exactly the ammunition he needed to prove Eleanor was a flight risk. Instead, they relocated to a small apartment rented in Virginia's name, technically legal but difficult to trace. They moved through the world like ghosts, invisible and watchful. Marcus was furious when he realized Eleanor had vanished with their daughter, but he could not prove wrongdoing. The custody hearing was postponed while lawyers argued about jurisdiction and procedure. They had bought time, but time was running out. The criminal charges are still coming, David Miller warned during one of his visits to the cramped apartment. If you're convicted, you lose Grace forever. Full stop. No appeals, no second chances. Then we need to prove I was set up. We need someone on the inside. Christine is in federal custody. Your evidence was seized. Rachel is compromised. There's no one left who can help us. Eleanor sat in silence, rocking Grace in her arms. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the storm raging around her. She was so small, so innocent, so completely dependent on a mother who seemed to have no way out. Then Eleanor looked up, her eyes suddenly sharp. There's one person, someone Marcus thinks is completely loyal, someone who's been watching everything from the inside. David stared at her. You can't be serious. Jessica Cole. Eleanor's voice was steady, certain. I'm going to turn his mistress into my ally. The meeting happened on a gray April afternoon in a public park far from the neighborhoods where either woman might be recognized. Eleanor chose the location carefully, somewhere with multiple exits, plenty of witnesses, no opportunity for ambush. She arrived first, pushing Grace in a stroller she had borrowed from a neighbor. The baby was awake now, staring up at the sky with the wide-eyed wonder of a newborn discovering the world. Jessica arrived 5 minutes later, her own pregnant belly visible beneath her designer coat. She looked nervous, scanning the area for observers, for threats, for any sign that this meeting was a trap. "Why would you contact me?" Jessica demanded, stopping several feet away. "You must hate me." "I do," Eleanor said honestly, "but I think we might want the same thing." "Which is?" "Freedom from Marcus Reeves." Something flickered across Jessica's face. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Eleanor pressed forward. "I've seen the pattern. I know how he operates. Right now, you're the star. The future Mrs. Reeves, mother of his next child. But the moment you become inconvenient, the moment you push back or ask for too much, or fail to meet some standard you never even knew existed, you'll be exactly where I am. Crazy, dangerous, disposable. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Eleanor took a step closer. "How many times has he grabbed your arm too hard and then apologized with flowers? How many times has he told you that you're being too emotional, too sensitive, imagining things? How many times has he made you feel grateful just to be chosen, like you're lucky to have him?" Jessica said nothing, but her hand drifted unconsciously to her upper arm, to a spot where Eleanor would have bet money there was a bruise hidden beneath the fabric. "I'm not asking you to trust me," Eleanor continued. "I'm asking you to protect yourself. Because when Marcus is done with me, you're next. And unlike me, you won't have anyone warning you." Long silence. In the stroller, Grace made a small bound and drifted back to sleep. "Even if I wanted to help," Jessica finally said, "what could I do? I don't have evidence of anything." "You have access. You see his schedule, his meetings, his communications. You hear the conversations he has when he thinks no one important is listening. And most importantly," Eleanor leaned closer, "you have his trust. Right now, that's more powerful than any document." Jessica stared at the ground for a longer moment, her hands twisted together, nervous, uncertain. "I'll think about it," she said. She walked away. Eleanor watched her go, not knowing whether she had just made an ally or signed her own death warrant. Through April and May and June, Jessica Cole's eyes slowly opened. It started with small things. Messages on Marcus's phone to another woman. Someone new, someone who was not Jessica. Flirty texts, familiar jokes, the unmistakable rhythm of a new affair beginning. When Jessica confronted him, Marcus gaslighted her with practiced ease. "That's just a client, baby. You're being paranoid. Is this what pregnancy hormones do to you? I thought you were stronger than this." At a company event, Marcus introduced Jessica as my assistant to an important investor's wife, denying their relationship in public despite the pregnancy swelling beneath her dress. When she protested later, he told her she was embarrassing him with her neediness. She discovered she had been quietly removed from the IPO bonus list. When she asked Marcus, he claimed it was an oversight that he would fix later. Weeks passed. The bonus list remained unchanged. Then came the moment that changed everything. Late in June, with her own belly now obvious and uncomfortable, Jessica was looking for a stapler in Marcus's desk drawer. What she found instead was a document that made her blood run cold. A prenuptial agreement, nearly identical to the one Eleanor had signed 12 years earlier. Unsigned, but ready, waiting for Jessica to become the next Mrs. Reeves so he could begin the whole cycle again. She finally understood. She was never the exception. She was never special. She was just the replacement, the next actress to play the role of Marcus Reeves's adoring wife before being discarded like all the others. On July 1st, Jessica contacted Eleanor. They met in the same park, the same bench, but everything was different now. Jessica's mask had cracked, her eyes were red from crying, her perfectly manicured nails bitten down to the quick. "I'll help you," Jessica said, "but I need guarantees, protection. If he finds out before I'm safe, he'll destroy me the same way he destroyed you." "What do you have?" "Recordings, conversations where he admits to planting evidence against you, meetings where he paid witnesses to lie, plans to transfer assets before the divorce is finalized." Jessica pulled out her phone and played the recordings. Marcus's voice filled the air between them, confident and casual, laying out his crimes like a man discussing dinner plans. Christine was useful for drawing Eleanor out. Now she takes the fall, and my wife looks like a criminal mastermind. Two birds with one stone. Rachel's brother is the leverage. She'll testify however we need her to. People do amazing things when you threaten their families. After the IPO, I'll deal with Jessica. Standard procedure. She knew what she was getting into. They all know on some level. They just convince themselves they're different. Eleanor looked up from the phone. Jessica's face was stone. He called me standard procedure, Jessica said, like I'm a line item in a budget, like I'm a problem to be managed, not a person to be loved. Welcome to the club. For a moment, they shared a look. Not friendship, not forgiveness. They might never be friends, might never fully trust each other, might carry the scars of this experience for the rest of their lives. But in that moment, they understood each other. Two women who had loved the same monster, two mothers fighting for their children, two survivors finding strength in their shared enemy. This is enough to exonerate me, Eleanor said, but it's not enough to destroy him. He'll claim the recordings are doctored, hire experts to create doubt. He'll find a way out. Then what do you need? I need him to admit everything, on record, in a way he can't deny or explain away, and I need it to happen publicly, where the whole world can see. Jessica shook her head. That's impossible. He'd never be that careless. He would, if he felt completely safe, if he believed he had already won. A plan began to take shape in Eleanor's mind, a plan that would require patience, precision, and a performance worthy of an Oscar. 2 weeks later, Eleanor met with FBI Special Agent James Harper in a secure location that Virginia had arranged through her old contacts in the Justice Department. Harper was a tall man in his 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much human cruelty to be surprised by anything. He listened to Eleanor's story without interruption, then reviewed Jessica's recordings with careful attention. This is significant, he said when the last recording ended. Combined with the financial evidence Christine provided, we have the foundation for a federal case. But Mrs. Reeves, I have to be honest with you. To guarantee conviction, we need more. What kind of more? Witness tampering alone gets him 5 years, probably less with a good lawyer. Securities fraud gets 10, if we can prove he knew about the falsified valuations. But if we can prove the pattern, the systematic destruction of anyone who threatens his power, we're looking at RICO charges, 25 to life. Virginia leaned forward. What would that require? A recorded confession, ideally in a setting where he feels untouchable, where he'd be arrogant enough to brag about what he's done. Eleanor thought about Christmas Eve, the rooftop party at the Meridian. Marcus with a champagne glass in hand, feeling like the king of the world, confident that no one could touch him. I know exactly the settings, she said. There's significant risk, Harper warned. If he suspects anything, if he realizes what you're doing, he could run. He has enough money to disappear forever, and he could take your daughter with him. Then we'll have to make sure he doesn't suspect. Eleanor's voice was steady, certain. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants, a complete surrender, and he's going to be so busy enjoying his victory that he won't see the trap closing around him. From August through November, Eleanor gave the performance of her life. She appeared at court hearings looking exhausted and defeated, her shoulders slumped, her eyes red from crying. She stopped fighting the custody arrangement. She accepted supervised visits with grace without protest, thanking Marcus graciously for allowing her to spend time with her own daughter. She sent Marcus messages dripping with surrender. You win. I can't fight anymore. I just want to see my daughter grow up, even if it's from the sidelines. Can we please end this peacefully? Marcus responded with magnanimous victory, the benevolent conqueror offering mercy to his defeated enemy. I never wanted it to be this way, Elle. Let's discuss terms like civilized people. They met for settlement discussions in his lawyer's office, a glass and steel monument to his success. Eleanor agreed to everything. Minimal custody, 4 hours a week, no spousal support, despite 12 years of marriage. Complete silence about his affairs, his crimes, his systematic destruction of her life. Marcus's lawyers were suspicious. The capitulation seemed too easy, too complete, but Marcus waved off their concerns. I broke her, he told his attorney, not caring that Eleanor was sitting right there, that she could hear every word. I told you I would. She's finally accepting reality. The IPO launched on November 15th. Reeves' capital was valued at $2.3 billion. Marcus was on the cover of business magazines, hailed as a visionary, a success story, a model of the American dream. He gave interviews about work-life balance and the importance of family, all while his mistress sat in the background and his wife plotted his destruction. If you have ever had to swallow your pride to survive, if you have ever had to pretend weakness when fury burned in your veins, then you understand what those months cost Eleanor. Every supervised visit where she had to thank Marcus for allowing her to see her own daughter. Every court appearance where she had to look defeated while reporters took photographs. Every night lying awake, knowing that the wrong word or the wrong expression could destroy everything she had worked for. What would you have done in her place? Would you have had the patience to play the long game? Would you have trusted that justice would come if you just waited long enough? Eleanor waited and watched and prepared. On December 1st, she sent Marcus the message that would change everything. I want to see Grace on Christmas Eve. Just 1 hour. I'll sign the final custody papers there. Consider it my Christmas gift to you. A clean ending. Marcus agreed immediately. He was so confident in his victory, so certain of his power, that he never stopped to consider why Eleanor would offer such a gift. Why would she make it easy for him, after everything he had done? Because that was what defeated people did. They surrendered. They gave up. They accepted the terms offered by the powerful and counted themselves lucky to survive it all. Marcus had spent his entire life winning. He had forgotten what it looked like when someone was just waiting for the right moment to strike. December 15th, Eleanor's team gathered in Virginia's apartment to finalize their plans. Agent Harper provided surveillance equipment so sophisticated it could be hidden in the fabric of a dress. Virginia coordinated logistics, timing every element down to the minute. Jessica rehearsed her role, the signals she would give, the position she would hold at the party. And Rachel Torres, desperate to make amends for her forced betrayal, provided the final piece of the puzzle. He's having the party at the Meridian penthouse, Rachel reported, her voice steady despite the guilt that still haunted her eyes. Same place as last year. Christmas Eve, black tie, 100 guests. He's calling it a celebration of new beginnings. How do I get access? He sent you an invitation. Apparently he wants to show everyone how magnanimous he is, letting his crazy ex-wife visit on Christmas Eve. You're going to be a prop in his performance. Eleanor smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Then we'll use his performance against him. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. FBI agents would be positioned throughout the hotel. Jessica would attend the party with a hidden recording device, feeding everything to the task force in real time. Eleanor would engage Marcus in conversation, push his ego, get him to talk about what he had done. When she had enough evidence for conviction, she would give the signal. The midnight gift would be her final play. But on December 20th, 4 days before Christmas, everything nearly fell apart. Agent Harper called with news that made Eleanor's blood run cold. Someone leaked that there's a federal investigation. Marcus is moving money, fast. Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency, shell companies we didn't even know about. He's liquidating everything. Can't you stop him? Not without tipping him off completely. If he knows how close we are, he'll run. He has enough money to disappear forever, and he'll take Grace with him. Eleanor felt the familiar fear rising, the same terror that had gripped her in those first dark days after Christmas. How long do we have? He scheduled a flight on December 26. Dubai. No extradition treaty. If he gets on that plane with your daughter, it's over. We'll never get him back. The Christmas Eve party became their only chance. We stick to the plan, Eleanor said. Whatever happens, I get him on record at that party, before midnight, before he can run. On Christmas Eve morning, Eleanor received a text from Jessica that changed everything. He knows something's wrong. He keeps asking about you, asking if I've talked to you. I'm scared. Then another message, minutes later. He just changed the custody exchange location, not the party, his private office at Reeves Capital. 10 p.m. Alone. No witnesses. The trap was springing, but in the wrong direction. Eleanor called Agent Harper. His voice was grim when he answered. Without the party setting, auditing, we lose our positioning. His office is private, secure. Even if you get a confession, he could claim entrapment. And if something goes wrong, we can't protect you. So what do I do? Officially, I have to advise you to abort. The risk is too high. Long pause. Eleanor could hear Harper breathing on the other end of the line. Unofficially, you're the only one who can get close to him. If you want to finish this, you'll have to do it alone. Eleanor looked at a photo of Grace sitting on her nightstand. 9 months old now, dark hair like her mother's, bright eyes that held all the promise of the future, a smile that could light up a darkest room. Tell me exactly what I need, Eleanor said. At 6 o'clock that evening, Eleanor began to prepare. She put on the red dress Marcus had bought her for their 10th anniversary, the one that had always been his favorite. She styled her hair the way he liked it, soft waves framing her face. She applied makeup carefully, just enough to look like the woman he used to want. In the mirror, she saw a stranger. The old Eleanor, the perfect wife, the mask she had worn for 12 years without even knowing it was a mask. Hidden beneath her dress was a recording device no bigger than a button. In her clutch was a velvet box containing a USB drive with copies of all the evidence, her real midnight gift for Marcus, though not the one he was expecting. Virginia drove her to Manhattan through light snow. The city was beautiful at twilight, lights sparkling against the darkening sky, windows glowing with holiday warmth. Everywhere Eleanor looked, she saw families together, couples holding hands, children pointing at decorations with wonder in their eyes. She thought about Grace, about all the Christmas Eves they would share if this worked, about all the Christmas Eves they would lose if it didn't. You don't have to do this, Virginia said, breaking the silence. We can find another way. There is no other way. If he gets on that plane, I never see Grace again. He'll raise her to hate me. He'll tell her I abandoned her, chose my freedom over my daughter. I won't let that happen. What if something goes wrong? Eleanor turned to look at her mother, at the woman who had survived her own destruction and rebuilt herself from nothing. Then you make sure Grace knows the truth, whatever happens. Promise me. Virginia pulled the car to the side of the road. The snow was falling harder now, big flakes that drifted lazily past the windshield. I'm so proud of you, Virginia said. You've become the woman I always knew you could be. Whatever happens tonight, never forget that. Eleanor hugged her mother hard, holding on for a long moment before letting go. Then she got out of the car and walked toward Reeves Capitol Tower, rising dark against the Christmas sky. The building was mostly empty at this hour, just security guards and the occasional late worker hurrying home to their families. Eleanor's heels clicked against the marble floor of the lobby, each step echoing in the cavernous space. The security guard recognized her. Mrs. Reeves, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Tom. My husband is expecting me. She rode the elevator alone to the 35th floor, watching the numbers climb. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. Whatever happened next, she was ready. The doors opened onto Marcus's private floor. He was waiting for her in the doorway of his office, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, wearing the expression of a king receiving tribute from a conquered enemy. You came, he said. I wasn't sure you would. You have my daughter. Where else would I be? The office was decorated for Christmas, though the decorations felt more like set dressing than genuine holiday spirit. A small tree in the corner, tastefully adorned in silver and white, garland along the windows, the city glittering below like a field of stars brought to earth. Grace was there, asleep in a portable crib beside Marcus's massive desk. Eleanor's heart clenched at the sight of her daughter, so small and peaceful, completely unaware of the battle being fought over her future. Marcus gestured to a leather chair facing his desk. Sit. Let's talk like civilized people. Eleanor sat. She crossed her legs, arranged her features into an expression of defeat, and prepared to give the performance of her life. Before we discuss custody, Marcus said, settling into his own chair behind the desk, I want you to understand something. I didn't want it to be this way. You forced my hand. Eleanor kept her face neutral. I forced you to have an affair for 18 months? You stopped being what I needed. He shrugged, the casual dismissal of a man who had never truly valued anyone but himself. The woman I married was ambitious, exciting. You became domestic, boring, just a wife. He sipped his scotch. Men like me need more than that. We need someone who challenges us, who keeps us interested. You stopped being interesting. So it's my fault. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I understand why you felt threatened. Women in your position often do. That's why I'm willing to be generous. He smiled, benevolent, magnanimous. I'll give you monthly visits. Supervised, of course, but regular. You can watch Grace grow up from a distance. Isn't that better than nothing? Eleanor forced herself to stay calm. Keep him talking. Let the recording capture everything. What about the criminal charges? Your people framed me. Marcus laughed, actually laughed, the sound echoing off the glass walls of his office. Eleanor, please. You framed yourself. I just provided the opportunity. He leaned back in his chair, comfortable now, warming to his subject. Christine was always a loose end. I knew she was gathering information against my family for years. The USB drive, the financial records, all of it. I could have had her arrested at any time, but that would have looked suspicious, vindictive. I needed someone else to be the villain. So you used me. You used yourself, the wronged wife seeking justice. So predictable, so easy to manipulate. He sipped his scotch again. If it's any consolation, you lasted longer than I expected. Most people fold much faster when I apply pressure. And Rachel, her brother? Collateral damage. People will do anything to protect their families. You understand that, don't you? He gestured at Grace's sleeping form. That's why you're here. That's why you'll sign whatever I put in front of you. Because you'd burn the world for her. That desperation, his smile widened, that's what makes you controllable. Eleanor's jaw tightened. She needed more. Something specific, undeniable, impossible to explain away. What about Jessica? Does she know she's next? Marcus waved dismissively. Jessica served her purpose. She'll get a settlement, sign an NDA, disappear. That's how it works. Women like her, like you're interchangeable, decorative, useful until you're not. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he believed he owned. The difference between us, Eleanor, is that I understand how the world really works. I don't pretend it's fair. I don't expect loyalty or love to matter more than power. That's why I always win. Every single time. He spread his arms wide, encompassing the glittering skyline before him. After tomorrow, I'll be in Dubai. Grace comes with me. You'll be here facing criminal charges with no money, no friends, no child. In 5 years, you'll be a cautionary tale people tell at parties. And he turned to face her, triumphant, invincible. I'll be building a new empire in the sun. You've thought of everything, Eleanor said. I always do. Eleanor stood slowly, walked toward him. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, but her voice stayed steady. There's just one thing you didn't account for. What's that? I'm not the same woman you married. She pulled out her phone. On the screen was Jessica's face on a video call. Behind her, the FBI task force was already in motion, agents spreading out through the building. Say hello, Marcus. You've been live streaming to a federal task force for the past 20 minutes. The color drained from his face. That's not possible. You were searched when you came in. Your security checked for wires. They didn't check for live video streaming through a standard smartphone. Technology, Marcus. It's not just for corporations anymore. His composure cracked. For the first time in all the years Eleanor had known him, she saw genuine fear on his face. This won't hold up in court. Entrapment, illegal surveillance. My lawyers will. Your lawyers are currently watching federal agents execute a search warrant at this building. Your offshore accounts were frozen an hour ago. And Dubai? Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. The FBI contacted them this afternoon. They've agreed to cooperate fully. Something about money laundering being a shared international concern. Marcus lunged toward her, Eleanor stepped back, but she was not afraid anymore. Don't. There are agents in the stairwell, the elevator, the parking garage. It's over, Marcus. It's finally over. He froze, his breathing ragged, the smooth facade finally shattered. Why so? He demanded. You could have just divorced me, taken whatever settlement I offered. Why destroy everything I've built? Eleanor looked at him, at this man she had loved for 12 years, at the father of her daughter, at the monster who had tried to take everything from her. You tried to take my daughter. You tried to make her believe her mother was a monster. There was never going to be a settlement for that. She walked to the crib and lifted Grace, who stirred and settled against her shoulder with a small sigh. The baby smelled like powder and warmth, like everything worth fighting for. You wanted to know what my Christmas gift was? Eleanor asked. This is it, the truth, delivered at midnight. Merry Christmas, Marcus. The office door burst open. FBI agents flooded in, weapons drawn. Marcus Reeves, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. They handcuffed him with efficient speed. As they led him away, he turned back one last time, his eyes meeting Eleanor's. You'll regret this. I'll fight. I'll appeal. I'll make your life. No, Marcus, you won't. Because I'm not afraid of you anymore. And that's something all your money can never buy back. The door closed behind him. Eleanor stood alone with her daughter in the empty office, watching the city lights through the window. The clock on Marcus's desk read 12:01 a.m., Christmas Day. At the same moment across town at the Meridian, the rooftop Christmas party was in full swing. 100 of Marcus's closest friends, investors, and associates clinked champagne glasses, toasting to futures that were already burning. Jessica stood near the center of the room, her hidden phone still feeding everything to the FBI task force. At exactly midnight, the elevator doors opened and agents flooded the rooftop. On the large screen that was supposed to show a Reeves Capital promotional video, someone patched in Marcus's confession. His own words echoed through the speakers, broadcast to everyone he had ever tried to impress. Women like her, like you're interchangeable, decorative, useful until you're not. That desperation, that's what makes you controllable. I'll be building a new empire in the sun. The room watched in stunned silence as the mighty Marcus Reeves destroyed himself with his own words. The midnight gift had been delivered. The aftermath unfolded over the following months like a slow-motion avalanche. Marcus Reeves was denied bail, deemed a flight risk given his planned escape to Dubai and his extensive offshore assets. He spent the months before his trial in federal custody, his empire crumbling around him, while lawyers fought losing battles on his behalf. Christine Wells was released within 2 weeks, all charges dropped now that the full scope of Reeves' family crimes had been revealed. Eleanor met her outside the courthouse on a gray January morning. You came, Christine said. She looked different now, lighter somehow, as if a weight she had carried for 15 years had finally been lifted from her shoulders. You helped me when no one else would. You went to prison because of me. I went to prison because of the Reeves family. You just helped me get out. Christine smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. What will you do now? I'm going to raise my daughter, start a foundation to help other women escape situations like ours. Try to build something good from all this pain. And I'm going to live, Christine said. Travel. Find out who I am when I'm not defined by what they did to me. She hugged Eleanor, an awkward embrace between two women who had never quite become friends but would always understand each other. Take care of that little girl. She's lucky to have a mother who fights. She's the reason I fought. Rachel's redemption came more slowly, more painfully. She had testified for the prosecution before the arrest, going to Agent Harper with everything she knew about the pressure Marcus had put on her. Her brother Diego received protected immigration status in exchange for her cooperation. The threat that had forced her betrayal became the bridge to her redemption. But trust, once broken, does not rebuild overnight. Eleanor saw Rachel for the first time in months at a coffee shop near her new apartment. The conversation was stilted at first, two women navigating the wreckage of a 20-year friendship. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Rachel finally said. I know I don't deserve it. You were protecting your family. That doesn't make it right. No, Eleanor sipped her coffee. But I understand it, and maybe understanding is where we have to start. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was something. A door left slightly open instead of slammed shut. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Eleanor sat in the gallery every day, watching as witnesses testified about Marcus's crimes. The financial fraud, the witness tampering, the systematic destruction of anyone who threatened his power. Jessica Cole testified too, her voice steady as she described how Marcus had manipulated her, used her, planned to discard her just like all the others. She was showing now, her pregnancy obvious beneath her courtroom attire. After she stepped down from the witness stand, her eyes met Eleanor's for just a moment. Not friends, they would never be friends, but something better than enemies. On the day of sentencing, Eleanor sat in the back row and watched Marcus Reeves receive his punishment. He stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, all traces of his former power stripped away. His expensive lawyers had tried everything, deals, delays, motions, but nothing had worked. "Mr. Reeves," the judge said, "you have been found guilty on 23 counts, including racketeering, securities fraud, witness tampering, and conspiracy. Your crimes represent a systematic pattern of abuse, financial, legal, and personal, against anyone who threatened your power." Marcus stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his eyes empty. "It is the sentence of this court that you serve 32 years in federal prison. Given the nature of your crimes and flight risk, you will serve your sentence at a maximum security facility with no possibility of parole for at least 20 years. The gallery murmured. Eleanor felt Virginia's hand squeeze her own. "Additionally," the judge continued, "all assets derived from your criminal enterprises are hereby forfeit. Your victims will receive full restitution." She paused. "Do you have anything to say?" Marcus finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I built an empire. I employed thousands of people. I gave to charity. You destroyed lives, Mr. Reeves. You manipulated. You lied. You treated people as disposable tools for your ambition. The empire you built was built on suffering. This court has no sympathy for your self-pity." The gavel fell. As guards led Marcus away, he passed Eleanor's row. Their eyes met one last time. Eleanor had expected to feel triumph, satisfaction, the sweet taste of victory over an enemy who had tried to destroy her. Instead, she felt something closer to pity. A small, pathetic man who had never understood that power built on cruelty always collapses. A father who would never watch his daughter grow up. A husband who had traded love for control and ended up with neither. She did not say anything. Neither did he. The door closed behind him. It was finally over. 1 year after the Christmas confrontation, Eleanor stood at the window of her new home, a modest farmhouse in Vermont, watching snow fall onto fields she never knew she wanted. Grace was 21 months old now, toddling around the living room on sturdy legs, chasing a golden retriever named Holly. Virginia sat by the fire reading, having moved north to be closer to her daughter and granddaughter. The Christmas tree sparkled in the corner, covered in ornaments that Grace had helped choose, lopsided and perfect. A knock at the door. Eleanor opened it to find Rachel standing on the porch, holding a wrapped present. Behind her, Diego and his family piled out of a minivan, children already racing toward the snow. "We brought tamales," Rachel said, Torres family tradition. "I thought maybe we could start a new tradition together." Eleanor looked at her friend, at the woman who had betrayed her and then sacrificed everything to make it right. The past year had not erased what happened, but it had built something new on top of the wreckage. "Come in, it's freezing out there." The house filled with warmth and noise and the smell of good food. Grace played with Diego's children, shrieking with delight as they built snow forts in the yard. Virginia helped Rachel in the kitchen, their conversation flowing easily now. Eleanor sat by the fire with a glass of wine, watching the chaos with a peace she had not felt in years. "I still can't believe how far you've come," Rachel said later, settling beside her. "This time last year, I try not to think about last year. But you should. Not the pain, but the transformation. You were so broken, Ellie, and now look at you. a home, a foundation that's helping dozens of women, a daughter who adores you. You rebuilt everything from ash. Eleanor watched Grace toddle over with a picture book, her cheeks red from the cold, her smile wide and trusting. "I'm not the same person I was," Eleanor said, picking up her daughter. "That woman is gone, but maybe that's okay. Maybe she needed to taste so this one could exist." On Christmas morning, after the guests had left and Virginia was napping and Grace was playing quietly with her new toys, Eleanor's phone rang. "Mrs. Reeves, this is Daniel Wright from the Wright Foundation." "Mr. Wright, Merry Christmas. I apologize for calling on a holiday, but I have news that couldn't wait. Our board met yesterday. We've approved full funding for the Midnight Foundation. $2 million for legal advocacy and financial assistance for women escaping domestic abuse and manipulation." Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes. "Mrs. Reeves, what you survived and how you survived it has inspired a lot of people. This foundation will help other women do the same. We believe in your vision." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept and that you'll keep fighting." "I accept, and I will. Always." She hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long moment. Then she laughed. Then she cried. Then both at once. Virginia appeared in the doorway. "Good news?" "The best." That evening, as the sun set behind the Vermont hills, Grace brought Eleanor a small wrapped box. Gamma Say Give. Inside the box, wrapped in velvet, was a simple gold necklace with a pendant in the shape of a phoenix rising from flames. Virginia's card read, "1 year ago, you walked into fire. Today, you fly. This is what resilience looks like, sweetheart. Never forget what you survived. Never forget what you became. I love you endlessly. Mom." Eleanor put on the necklace. The phoenix rested over her heart. Grace pointed at it. "Bird. Yes, baby, it's a special bird, a phoenix. When everything burns down around her, she rises from the ashes, stronger than before. Like Mama?" Eleanor's breath caught. She pulled Grace close, this daughter she had fought so hard to keep, this child who would grow up knowing her mother had never surrendered. "Yeah, sweetheart, like Mama." If there is a lesson in this story, it is not that justice always comes, or that the righteous always prevail. The world does not work that way, and we both know it. Sometimes the villains win, sometimes the victims stay victims. Sometimes there is no midnight gift, no dramatic reversal, no triumphant ending. But sometimes, if you are strong enough and patient enough, if you find the right allies and wait for the right moment, if you refuse to give up even when giving up would be so much easier, sometimes justice does come. Sometimes the liars are exposed and the truth is told. Sometimes the empires built on cruelty crumble into dust. Sometimes the women who were supposed to be interchangeable and decorative and controllable prove to be something else entirely. Something stronger, something fiercer, something that cannot be broken. Eleanor Reeves stood at the window of her Vermont farmhouse, Grace in her arms, watching the last light of Christmas fade from the sky. The phoenix pendant caught the dying sun and glowed like an ember against her chest. Behind her was a warm house filled with love. In front of her was a future she had built from the ashes of her old life. The Midnight Foundation would open its doors in the spring, ready to help other women survive what she had survived. Marcus Reeves would spend the next 3 decades in a federal prison, watching through barbed wire as the world forgot his name. His mistress had become his undoing. His wife had become his destroyer. His midnight gift had been the truth he thought he could bury forever. But Eleanor did not think about Marcus anymore. She thought about Grace, about the woman her daughter would become. She thought about Virginia, about the mother who had shown her what survival really looked like. She thought about the women she would help, the lives she would save, the cycle of abuse she would help break. She thought about Christmas Eve 1 year ago, standing in her dining room with a table set for 2 and a gift that would never be opened. She thought about the woman she had been then, naive and trusting, desperate to believe in a love that had never really existed. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who had learned that the most powerful gift you can give yourself is not revenge and not even justice. It is resurrection, the ability to rise from the ashes of everything you thought you were and become something new, something better, something that burns brighter than before. "Merry Christmas, baby girl," Eleanor whispered to her daughter. "Merry Christmas, Mama," Grace replied. Eleanor laughed. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and white and new. The midnight gift had not been revenge. It had been resurrection. And as the last light of Christmas faded into a Vermont night, Eleanor Reeves finally understood what her mother had told her all those months ago. Justice does not run on our schedule, but it runs. It always runs. The question is whether you will be standing when it arrives. Eleanor was standing. She had survived the fire. She had risen from the ashes. And now, with Grace in her arms and the phoenix over her heart and a whole new life stretching out before her, she was finally, completely, irrevocably free.